Hello, and welcome back to Rushing the Field, a national college football podcast from NBC Sports. I'm Nicole Auerbach, joined by my pal and Ohio State national champion, Joshua Perry, here to catch up on all things college football. Been a couple weeks apart with some March Madness duties, but excited to get back into it. We're going to kind of use today's show as like burning questions for the Big Ten contenders and other storylines. We'll get into the House settlement and the latest there as it inches closer and closer to final approval. But Joshua, happy spring. Spring ball is full on underway. The portal is about to open again, so we are in the thick of it.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It doesn't feel like spring. I'm in Columbus, Ohio right now, and we had snow a couple of days ago, and there was some sleet yesterday. Still cooking on my Blackstone outside because I'm a fool, and I feel like it is spring, so I'm going to treat it as spring. But yeah, spring ball coming to a conclusion. It felt like, the offseason got everybody. I feel like this came up on us a little bit quicker than it feels like it typically does. But before we get into it, how was March Madness? Saw you out there doing a lot of coverage. It looked like a ton of fun.
Yeah, it was great. I was in Tampa, so I was doing the women's Final Four. So the games weren't very good, weren't very close. But UConn winning so after 9 years, a drought, very interesting. Happy for Paige Beckers to get her full circle moment and getting that championship. It's funny. I've seen she's doing the rounds. She's doing like the Today Show and the Tonight Show and all that stuff. And I'm shocked she took the net off. She was wearing it like for like 3 days straight. And now she's not. So I feel like she's going to show up with that at the WNBA draft.
She might have been getting like a rash on her neck or something.
I know. Yeah. In order to be like that Kim Mulkey shirt. Did you see like that sweater she wore that like looked like a net?
I did.
Like, yeah, that'll be Paige. But the men's Final Four, those Final Four games were very good, very close. Ridiculous. Some like excruciating losses there. For Houston in the champ game, Duke in the semifinal. Everybody got to use their little White Lotus memes from the Duke loss. And
Still
that's
haven't
really
seen the show.
Oh, Joshua, got to work on that. You got an off season. You got time.
All right.
I
have time.
You have time. I know you're too busy with your Bravo shows.
I am.
We're back though. Basketball in the rearview mirror, back to football. You and I both were at the Notre Dame Pro Day. So before we get into Big Ten country, any takeaways on kind of the state of Notre Dame? Like we had some conversations with the coaches. We got to spend some time. Chris Ash, who we both know, back in college, now the new defensive coordinator. Any like big picture takeaways from our visit to South Bend?
Yeah, I mean, I think after winning a championship, it's always, or playing for a championship in their case, but having that stretch of the long season and all the success that they had, I feel like things are tough because it impacts the offseason, but it impacts the mentality of the team a little bit. Nobody wants to admit that, but it does. But I think that they've done a good job of getting back to that workman-like mentality, which is, again, tough with the quick turnaround. They're losing a lot of veterans. And so, Marcus Freeman, I think part of the challenge for him this offseason into the summer is really figuring out who his guys are going to be because they had a strong group last year. But I do think their roster's in a good spot. A lot of players that I think can be super impactful, and their coaching staff is also in a great spot. Mike Denbrock, very familiar now with that program and what he wants to do offensively, and maybe it can evolve a little bit with the quarterback battle that's going on. And then, as you mentioned, you and I both know Chris Ash, but his job is not to change anything necessarily. It's just to enhance what they've been doing on the defensive side of the ball, and I think that he can add that to them. So for as crazy of a year as it was last year and all the challenges that you deal with in an offseason like theirs, I do think that they're in a good spot. Now, the big issue looking ahead, that schedule is rough to start the
early.
Year. So they've got to figure these things out, the leadership and the rotations and who's going to be their guy. Like they got to figure all those things out pretty early, but I do think they're in position to have it all figured out by the time the season starts.
Right. It's a good question. I mean, the big question is going to be the quarterback battle. CJ Carr, Steve Angeli, the presumed battle between the two of them. And then also, as you mentioned, Chris Ash, he talked to us about some of the zone coverages and some of the specific areas where obviously Notre Dame's a man defense primarily, but against some of the best teams that present individual challenges, that's where you'll probably see the Chris Ash imprint. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a fun time to see Notre Dame, like you said, really challenged right out of the gate. We'll obviously talk a lot more about them as we get deeper into the off season. But it was fun to get there, fun to see. And as you mentioned, coming off a championship appearance, the way that they've tinkered with their spring and let guys who had a lot of reps kind of rest a little bit more, or spend more time in strength and conditioning. Very interesting, because I think everyone's kind of figuring that out with the extra games and also just the season lasting longer. So that's an interesting segue actually into the national champion. So we'll start there for our Big Ten burning questions. We'll start with Ohio State. I don't think anyone expects a step back, because they never do for the Buckeyes. But there is a lot of player turnover. There's a lot of coaching turnover, new coordinators on both sides, although, of course, Brian Hartline, very familiar to the Buckeyes. But you go out and bring in Matt Patricia. We've been seeing these NFL coaches coming into college, but he really he has not been there anytime recently. And so this will be an adjustment, of course, for him coming into the college game. You've got a quarterback competition. We've not had a quarterback name. Lost a lot of, kind of senior leadership off of that national championship team. But again, so much talent all over the place. And you still have, I think, who's going to start the season as the best player in college football. Wow, basketball, still in the brain. Best player in college football in Jeremiah Smith. So, Joshua, burning questions for Ohio State and just sort of like what's next?
I think my biggest questions are the coordinators, first off, where, as you mentioned, Brian Hartline's been around there. A couple of years ago, they tried the Brian Hartline as coordinator experiment, and it didn't work out very well for them. And Ryan Day assumed play calling duties. And Brian Hartline went back to work and got more immersed in scheme and figuring out blocking protections and run game and things of that nature that he had to really dive into to become a coordinator. But as we saw from last year with Ohio State, and there's precedent for this, but especially in this day and age of college football, your head coach is best served not being a play caller. There has not been a primary play caller head coach that has won a national title since Jimbo did it in 2013. Okay, so just put that into your mind and understand how important it was that Chip Kelly was there and Ryan Day could CEO the thing. And so Brian Hartline, I think, has to work out for them. And from all the indications, it sounds like things are going well. And then you flip it over to the defense, where Matt Patricia comes in, very highly thought of as a defensive mind. But he's also tasked of kind of running what Ohio State does and not changing things entirely too much, while coaching a group that is going to be relatively inexperienced because they lost a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. It's a big offseason for both of those guys in figuring out exactly how they're going to make their mark on Ohio State's program. And so for me, the burning questions are, did you hit on the coordinators? Because we've seen how important that is for Ohio State. Last year with Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles, they had probably the best coordinator duo in college football.
Yeah, I think a much more secondary question is the quarterback. When is the quarterback competition going to be decided? It looks like it's going to stretch into fall camp, which is nothing new, by the way, for Ohio State. This has happened. But I remember we were there last year in the spring for spring game and talking to Ryan Day about Julian, saying they were really high on him, but he was really raw. He was really young. His body looked young. So interested to get more of a glimpse of him and more insight into where he is. And where that competition is. Regardless, though, I mean, Joshua, as you look with all the turnover from a player personnel, where do you see the strengths? Without knowing who's going to be the quarterback. I mean, you still have Jeremiah Smith, so obviously there's one. But defensively, where are you most confident as we sit here in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I would look at the offensive line as a group that was embattled last year. I think is going to be a positive for Ohio State this year. And that's important when you have a new quarterback. Certainly the wide receiver group is going to be a big plus as well. On the defensive side of the ball, I like what they have on the top line of their defensive line. I like their starters. I think they're going to be missing the depth that they had a year ago. And we saw how important depth was when you're trying to make a big run into the postseason. And then I look at the linebacker group where you got Sonny Styles back, and that was a huge player to have come back. Arvell Reese was a guy who was a rotational player in that linebacker room last year. I think he could be one of the next great ones as an Ohio State linebacker. So I feel pretty confident in that group there. As you mentioned, with Ohio State, there's always so much talent. There are always young players that are ready to rock and roll. It's just the idea that there are so many new faces that we're going to see this year. And again, we talked about it with Notre Dame. They're getting things started off pretty quick too there in Columbus, the beginning of the year. So they're going to have things figured out by the time camp ends.
Right. And listen, like this is where you try to learn from maybe your biggest rival, right? So Michigan, all the guys came back. They were super like veteran loaded. They win a national championship and it was rough last year, right? I mean, ultimately by the end, Michigan fans are happy because it's like the greatest 8-win season ever because they beat Ohio State and they beat Alabama to end it.
Right.
But that transition when you go from like everybody came back to what's next can be really tough. And so there will definitely be some growing pains and as you know everyone gets up to speed, but like you said, get started with a big challenge right out of the gate. I do want to talk about Michigan. We'll get to Penn State, even though I think they're probably going to start ranked above Michigan, but let's talk about we'll go up to the school up north. This is also a fascinating offseason for Sharon Moore. Made a coordinator change on the offensive side, bringing Chip Lindsey. That offense was anemic last year. It was a problem. It was extremely one-dimensional. And nothing really worked with the pass game at all, no matter who was at quarterback. So you bring in Chip Lindsey and you also go out and spend. Your donors have spent. You're bringing in Bryce Underwood, number one quarterback in the class, high expectations. Now, he's not been named the starter. Mikey Keene, who they brought in, kind of the veteran journeyman type quarterback, reportedly injured. So that's part of it. But the question is, I mean, does Underwood start week one? How do you work him in? I think we all do expect to see him playing as a freshman this year. But I think the questions are, how does the offense look different? I think you can expect there's going to be more of a downfield vertical pass game. And then, you have some receivers like Donovan McCulley, who there's really high expectations for. And I think that, you're just hoping to see a lot of growth in the pass game. Because I think that Michigan, regardless of who they're losing to the draft, is going to be sound defensively and prepared on that side of the ball. Although, again, you are losing veteran leadership and kind of the middle of the front of the defense, which is a very pivotal place. But I think the questions are really like, hey, how much better can this offense be? And when are we seeing Bryce Underwood?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of questions about the Michigan defense. I mean, last year, that side of the ball got started off a little bit slow, too. And I think there was a feeling out process of who they were going to be with the coordinator change that went on. By the end of the year, they were playing so well under Wink Martindale. It's like, whatever, it's kind of, business as usual on that side of the football. The offense was the question. It was the issue. And even when it was Jim Harbaugh and his offense, and they had JJ McCarthy and they had Blake Corum, it was still kind of like, okay, y'all run the ball a lot, and we know you got a first-round quarterback, but the pass game is like still underwhelming at times. And so you remove the first-round quarterback out of that equation. Yes, and part of the reason is the wide receiver recruiting has not been great. You mentioned Donovan McCulley. He has to be big because that room has been pretty thin over the last couple of years. And then, when you have the quarterback issue and you don't have the wide receivers, it really does hamper your play calling. Chip Lindsey's a very interesting hire to me because it wasn't super splashy. Like, I think there were some Michigan fans that were like, could have had a bigger splash. He's a guy who loves playing with multiple tight ends in the game. It feels like Michigan football to me. And to your point, they're trying to develop this downfield passing game. Now, again, the question is, do you have the horses at wide receiver if you finally figured out the quarterback to be able to do that? We know Mikey Keene likes to throw it down the field. We actually saw Fresno State play Michigan last year, and he was launching them, right? And like, it might have been a little bit of trouble for him, but he was launching it downfield, and Bryce Underwood is very talented. So the question for me is, do you have the horses at wide receiver to actually make the quarterback situation and the coordinator situation better?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And basically, it was Roman Wilson in recent years. And that was it. And that was a difference maker, by the way, to winning a national championship, was having a true number one receiver. McCulley wants to be that. He's talked about it. He said it. He wants to be the Big Ten's leading receiver. So they're going to need that if they are going to have that explosive vertical pass game. Going to be really interesting to watch all of that play out, including the quarterback competition, and get some insight into Bryce Underwood. Everyone's been raving all the stuff you want to hear about, like that, that big name freshman quarterback coming in. You're getting it from his teammates. So again, expectations are high there. And I think, again, with the way they ended the season, It was good for Sharon Moore, certainly, because I think it was rough in the start, in the middle. But this is his first full offseason. Like, this is his first time to go into the portal truly and to figure out, a full recruiting, like all the things that he was doing in a very compressed time frame last offseason.
His story obviously is not written, but we did get to a point toward the middle of the season where there were Michigan fans openly asking the question on social media, was it a mistake not to do a national search and maybe not to do more due diligence on an experienced coach? That's what it felt like to start. And by the end of the year, to your point, going into Columbus and getting that huge win is like just, that would have made everything better regardless of what happened in the postseason. But they made Alabama look silly. And I know Alabama wasn't like the Nick Saban Alabama, but like it's still Alabama.
Michigan wasn't even like, they had a bunch of first string guys not even playing in that game.
No,
it was
crazy.
It was crazy. And they also kind of lit a fire under Ohio State, that Ohio State won a national championship. So, there's the good and the bad.
This is the pettiest rivalry in the world, and this is why me and Nicole love it.
Yep, exactly. And two rivals, back-to-back years, national champions. The third Big Ten team that's trying to do this, trying to follow that mold of, hey, we're bringing everybody back, we're running it back. This is it, like it's championship or bust, is Penn State. So they are hoping that they can be the third team in a row to do this. They bring back Drew Aller. They bring back these two great running backs. They bring back defensive guys that are key. They bring everybody back, and they went out and spent and just plucked Jim Knowles away from Ohio State the week that he won a national championship. They lose their running backs coach to Notre Dame, but then they go and bring in Stan Drayton, who, by the way, had a great reputation as a running backs coach before he went to be the head coach at Temple, which didn't work out. So they are loaded. And the schedule in their situation, very manageable. I think this is a team that's going to stay in the top 3, top 5 all season long, and certainly be in the college football playoff. But the question is, and the burning question always is with Penn State, can James Franklin win the big one? And by the big one, I mean like a national championship this year. I mean, that's the expectation for this team when they were like 1 minute away from playing for it a season ago, and then everybody comes back.
Yeah, it's the biggest question out there. And I feel like last year, it depends on how you viewed Penn State's path, on the narrative of what you think about last year.
What they achieved.
People would say, some people would say, oh, they had the clear path. And so it's like, is this much different than what we would have seen in the past? I also think playing in a college football playoff semifinal game is a huge deal. And they showed a little grit and resolve that maybe we haven't seen before. And so now there is the expectation. I think regardless of where you feel in that conversation, they got the plan that Michigan had. They've got the plan that Ohio State had last year. Veteran team, bring guys back, like determined to try to win a title. So that is the big question, is can they do it? I think the underlying question there is, what does that formula have to look like? We saw Penn State last year look very good defensively. We saw their run game look really good, and we saw their pass game look meh at times. And it wasn't because of the quarterback. Drew Aller did a fantastic job.
Also
wasn't because of the tight end.
I know. He did everything he possibly could.
That man, one game, I think against USC, had like 18 catches. He was trying to carry the pass game. The wide receiver room was just not good enough. It was not up to standard. They went into the portal this year. They got a couple of players out there. They're hoping that they can be impacts. I'm going to go on record as saying, if that wide receiver room is not significantly better than what it was a year ago, that's going to be the thing that stops them from getting it done, because they're built well just about everywhere else.
I agree. And I think even though they brought some guys in, I think you got to go get at least another one in the spring portal window. Like, have too many, because you haven't had enough receiver to find the impact guys. I think that is the limiting factor for Penn State. And I think anyone who has watched these teams the last couple of years would say that. I think also, obviously you're not going to have a Tyler Warren, like a tight end that's in the Heisman conversation, but you do want production out of that position, because that's always been something that the best Penn State teams have had. Interested to see Jim Knowles' impact on the defense. Like, this is another place I think we could say, Michigan, Notre Dame, Penn State, like they've had different defensive coordinators and like have not skipped a beat, because It is ingrained in the identity of the place. And like when we were talking about Chris Ash, one of the things he told us is like, it's not the Chris Ash defense, it's the Notre Dame defense. And then you add your wrinkles. Now, Wink Martindale is running like a Wink Martindale defense at Michigan. Like there are some differences, but Penn State has been elite defensively. We can nitpick on certain spots where they could be better or position groups, but Jim Knowles is walking into a position group or side of the ball that is at a very high level, and he's a very high level defensive coordinator. So you got to think that the defense is once again going to be a strength and certainly complement all of those veteran offensive players and put them in good positions in games. So I'm excited to see what Jim Knowles can do with the talent and the athleticism that he has on the defensive side.
No doubt. And Jim Knowles, he's like many of the coordinators right now. They want to be aggressive in the secondary. So one of my criticisms last year of Penn State is I didn't think that they were like an elite speed secondary. So if you're going to play man-to-man, they have to have guys who can run back there. But the flip side of that is Jim Knowles' defense also had guys who could wreak havoc in the front when they were playing their best. And Penn State has guys like that. Deni Dennis Sutton is another game changer. And they've just had like a just year after year bunch of edge rushers that are really good players. He's the next one up. Zane Durant on the interior of that defensive line is another one.
Those should be the two.
Yes.
Defensive
they're phenomenal ball players. Yes. Yep. And so you can start from there and get everything else figured out. If you got guys up front who can wreck the game, you're going to be in a good spot. So I think Jim Knowles is going to be working from an advantage here.
Let's talk about Oregon as well, as kind of we're talking about the top tier of the Big Ten. And Oregon won the conference in year one. Won the conference championship game, beat a good Penn State team in there. But, the thing that I think we're going to remember is they'll be the face of the buys in the college football playoff and the seeding issue that the commissioners are still trying to work through and change because, you're the number one seed in the college football playoff and you didn't win a game because you had a bye and then you got crushed by an Ohio State team that admittedly was playing extremely well and beat everybody. But I think that is the lasting impression of this team. We've talked about it. Dan Lanning gets an extension. He's exactly the right guy. We would both say we would want to run things in this program. But I think the question is, what did you learn from last year? What did you learn in how you managed the regular season? What did you learn from playing Big Ten teams and beating them? And then what do you take away and then adjust to have the postseason success? Because some of the narrative around Dan Lanning, despite the wins over Ohio State in the best game of the regular season, and then a really good win over Penn State in the Big Ten championship game, is about the big games, right? Like now we're talking playoff games. Now we're talking national championship level games for Dan Lanning. You've got a quarterback change. Everyone's expecting Dante Moore. He's not been officially named the starting quarterback, but high expectations for him.
Yes.
So I'm interested to see what this looks like. And also, but mostly, what did you learn from the highs and the lows of last season?
Yeah, and that's such an interesting question because I was thinking about it when you threw that one in the rundown. And I think that's a big one for them to ask. And they have to come up with something reasonable. But me on the outside, it's like, I don't know. Sometimes you just have your worst day and you're playing a really good team and everything is going right for them. And this is what happens. And we've seen championship teams have bad days where in 23, Michigan had one against Maryland and a whole bunch would have had to go wrong for them to lose that one. Georgia played Missouri a couple years ago and a whole bunch would have had to go wrong for them to lose that one. And it was just Oregon running into Ohio State. So they have to come up with an answer. But on the outside, I'm kind of like, maybe it was just the fact that you were playing your worst game on a day where you're beating a team that was playing the best that they've ever played. Now, I think one of the questions that I'm so curious about is we've seen with these superstar head coaches, and I would put Dan Lanning in that class right now with Kirby, and when Saban was coaching, we've seen it with Ryan Day. Urban Meyer was one of the guys who always did this. You lose a bunch of guys and you just find a whole bunch of other guys that come in and they're really good. And it's like you never lost anybody at all. And Oregon has some of the least returning production in college football this coming season. And I want to know, for Dan Lanning, as young as he is at this stage in the game, did you hit on the recruits? Did you hit on the transfers? And can you just reload like your former bosses did, like some of the other great coaches did? That to me is kind of the next step in the evolution for Lanning.
Yeah, and there's been a ton of hype around the number one receiver in the 2025 class, Jacorian Moore, 5-star recruit coming in. Expect him to be an impact guy right away as a true freshman. The flip side of not having a lot returning is what we have at Illinois. And I put them in this category. I want to know if you think that they are a Big Ten contender as well, but they bring a lot back. Okay, so they come up, by the way, a quiet, I would say, a 10-3 season. But the way that they ended it with the win over South Carolina in the Citrus Bowl and the jawing between the two head coaches afterwards, got people's attention. And then you got Luke Altmaier back. You're bringing back 16 of the 22 offensive and defensive starters from a 10-win team. And listen, you're bringing back key defensive players. You're all 5 starting offensive linemen and the quarterback who had a huge step in his career last year. He was someone who could make great plays, but also could make really bad interceptions, cleaned that up, and was much more reliable, will be one of the top quarterbacks coming into the Big Ten this season. Do you buy it? Is Illinois legitimately going to be able to contend for a Big Ten title this year?
I'm buying into it. I think Brett Bielema is one of the most underrated coaches nationally. I think he knows how to teach really well, and he's a very detailed person himself. I've sat in his team meetings before when he's going over practice plans, and some of the stuff I see in there is next level. And that's what you have to be when you're at a place like Illinois, where you can't get top 5 recruiting classes every single year. And then you start to go through their schedule. They've got Indiana, which is like really good year last year, but question about what they're going to be this year. They play USC, which is a team that needs to take a step forward. We'll talk about in a sec. They have Ohio State, Washington, again, kind of a question. And then outside of that, it's like a bunch of winnable games. So basically, I named 4 teams. If you split those, you might not make the Big Ten championship, but you're probably making the college football playoff at that point.
Agree. And Indiana, for example, and Washington, like those are games that if you're as good as we think you can be, you're going to win those games too.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to have some time with Luke Altmaier and Coach Bielema and visit Illinois next week. So excited to get a better sense of them. And we'll circle back after that trip to kind of recap what we learned. But man, there is a lot to like with Illinois. And as you mentioned, the way the schedule falls. Now, there are intriguing storylines elsewhere. We don't have enough time to go with like a burning question for all 18 teams in this conference, because that would take hours and hours. But there are some really intriguing storylines. I want to start with Indiana. What's next, right? You come off of a season beyond anyone's wildest dreams in year 1 under Curt Cignetti. This is a program that has lost more college football games than anybody else in history. And you go and you make the college football playoff. Your only 2 losses, which by the way, again, we've talked about this. Indiana did not deserve to be like the most polarizing team in the country and used as like the central argument in everyone's college football arguments. Turns out your only 2 losses were the 2 teams that played for a national championship game. But what happens next? You turn the page. You bring in Fernando Mendoza from Cal, quarterback that I think both of us really like. And you are seemingly hitting on some other guys out of the portal that have some Big Ten experience or Midwest experience. But really, like, what is the new floor? What is the new ceiling for Indiana? I don't think we're expecting a college football playoff appearance because, you need a lot to go right. But I think, you're looking at like an 8-9 win team. I mean, that would be great for Indiana. They like that being a realistic expectation before the season starts is awesome for the Hoosiers. Yeah. That's not usually where they are.
And I'm there with you in that expectation. And I think part of the reason is Curt Cignetti is a very good ball coach, but like he's had the quarterback in back-to-back years. Like if he can keep getting the quarterback, you feel like that's one big portion of your team that you have stabilized. And the schedule certainly did help them last year. Like if people want to bring that up, and I think it's fair to insert in the conversation. But to your point, if you can talk me from 11 wins in the regular season down to 10, 9, 8 wins, I think that's really good for them. I also think that's very realistic because even though their schedule was not the toughest in the world, they were beating the hell out of the teams that they were playing. Like that was a very good football team. And so he's just got to keep that same formula, get the quarterbacks in there, right? Have the guys on defense play really structurally sound, have that junkyard dog mentality, all of the toughness that he likes. And you've got a team that's probably looking at 8 wins a year in the Big Ten.
And by the way, like that's such a threshold for Indiana that they made shirts for 9-win Indiana. Like that was a big deal a few years back. So again, I think they'll take it. If that is a new, disappointment off of a CFP season, I put that in air quotes for anyone who's listening. There are some other teams though that like actually need to take a huge step forward. Let's start with Wisconsin. Their schedule is brutal. Like there is a period of time where, you could lose like 4 or 5 straight games in the middle. If you're just looking at it right now. I feel like that's the big question with Wisconsin. Like, can they take a step forward? Can they go back to being like Wisconsin football? And not necessarily like stylistically, although I think we are going to see more of a return to some of that offense on the offensive side, because it didn't work trying to go away from completely being like a downhill running team. But like Luke Fickell, it needs to take a step forward. I think there's a lot of frustration. They have lost basically all of their big games or their games against good teams in the 2 years that he's been there. And he was a hot name. This was a big hire. This was supposed to be a hire that takes Wisconsin from being like Big Ten West good to nationally good. And so I think even despite the schedule, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of expectation here.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And I still think Luke Fickell is a phenomenal ball coach. I played for the guy. I know what he's made of. First off, quarterback injuries have hurt them in the last couple of years, which is a really unfortunate spot to be in. But that's the reality of it. And when you're trying to go from being that, 3 yards in a cloud of dust offense to wide open, air raid, air run, whatever you want to call it, and your quarterback gets hurt, you're at a disadvantage there. And so you take it with a grain of salt. It certainly does not look like it's been going well. The defense doesn't look like the old Wisconsin defenses. Luke Fickell's a defensive guy, so that's a bit of a problem there. They do have a lot to work on. I will say, we just talked about Indiana and how they benefited from a schedule that was favorable a year ago. And Wisconsin has this schedule right now that is ridiculously hard. And this is what you get in these big bloated super conferences is the schedule imbalance is a thing that can happen.
It is. And I think that's absolutely a point. And like, that's where, you can say like, an SEC schedule versus a Big Ten schedule depends. But a lot of this is based on historical success, right? Like this is why Indiana's schedule was where it was last year. The calculations of like how they're trying to figure out what is the right schedule for different tiers within the Big Ten is part of that. And so Wisconsin, yes, it is a brutal schedule. We're going to talk about it that way. But like, that's because Wisconsin's supposed to be good and historically it's good, right?
But I feel like you have the opportunity, if you're the people sitting over there in the offices in Rosemont, to say, okay, they're not that right now.
I know.
So,
or like
in Indiana's not bad right now.
I know.
So why are we doing this?
They didn't know that Indiana
They didn't know that then, but now we know. Right?
Yeah,
we know what Wisconsin's been the last couple of years. It's not like they have to make these conference schedules like 5 years in advance with the knowledge we have then. Like there's a way to do this where you can balance the schedules a little bit more in real time. So you don't have a team like Wisconsin that's got to play like Michigan, Ohio State, like Oregon, all in like a 4-week span. Like they're going to get murdered.
Or if you have that schedule, those teams as your draws, like maybe not all back to back, right?
Yeah,
like that's,
it's just terrible.
The sequencing could be
so bad.
Part of it as well. How about another program needs to take a significant step? Lincoln Riley's USC team.
Yeah.
This is one that, they've been trending in the wrong direction last couple of years. The further away we get from the Caleb Williams Heisman season, I think the more frustrated people are that was not maximized into a college football playoff appearance. They were very close, but the defense was just horrendous that year and for a period of years. So I think you're still looking for defensive improvement year over year. And then also with Jaden Maeva, like, is he the right quarterback? Is he the guy that can, kind of take a Lincoln Riley offense back to being a Lincoln Riley offense? But I just think like they need to win a lot more games. They can't be an 8-win team. Like that is not what Lincoln Riley has paid the big bucks to do.
Well, and that's not what USC is historically, since we're talking history here. Like this is a program that's put out Heisman winners. It's a program that has won many titles. So I think that should be a source of frustration for USC fans here. And the reality to me is I think they are a team that has to stack confidence throughout their schedule. Because to me, if things start to get a little bit sticky, like midway through the year and they lose a couple games, that's where things could go bad because you start replaying the bad seasons that you've had in the past there. I think one of the most interesting parts of this conversation we're having when it comes to Wisconsin, when it comes to USC, is we're looking at coaches that are like, they're college football playoff coaches. Like they've played, they've taken their teams, to the part of the season everybody wants to be in. And we're now asking the question, can they get the job done? And situation is so interesting when it comes to this and like all the external factors. And I've been as critical of Lincoln Riley as anybody has been, but I know the guy knows how to coach. And I think that's where some of the frustration really comes in, is like there's expectations just to being Lincoln Riley outside of being at USC and everything that comes with that.
Right. And they build on each other. And I think that's part of when you look at, even offensive shortcomings, like that's the stuff that you're not expecting to see because it is Lincoln Riley. So going to be a fascinating offseason there. We'll get into all of this much further as we get into the offseason, just spring burning questions. But before we go, Joshua, we got to catch up on kind of the news of the week and the news of really college sports right now. And that is everyone's waiting for the House settlement to be finally approved by Judge Claudia Wilken. There was a hearing earlier in the week for objectors and objections. It was like a 7-hour appetizer to the national championship game in San Antonio. And really, like, she had given this preliminary approval a while back, but everyone's kind of waiting on this to know exactly what the rules are going to be and the parameters are going to be moving forward into this revenue share era. And I think that, to me, the interesting takeaways from this and her questions, which she said, I think it's a good settlement, don't quote me. So it's going to get approved. There are just going to be potentially some tweaks, or she can ask certain things to be changed. So she was really focused on roster limits, which I think you and I have had this conversation where, like, when they were starting to talk about this settlement, I remember calling a couple of athletic directors and conference officials and being like, why is roster limits at all part of this? Like, you're figuring out how much you're going to pay athletes in back pay who didn't make money off their NIL. And then you're setting up a revenue sharing model moving forward. So why is roster limits part of it? The way it was explained to me was like, well, we're going to have, increased benefits. We're going to be able to directly pay athletes. We need to know how many are on a team. And then you can do more full scholarships for sports like baseball. Okay. Still, again, I don't know that it needed to 100% be part of this phase, but that was kind of where Claudia Wilken was on this, by the way. She was kind of like, hey, why is this need to be implemented right away? Could you not like gradually grandfather in players that people aren't immediately losing scholarships, which we've already seen, by the way, people cutting walk-ons and cutting scholarships, or I guess adjusting scholarships. Cause like you can have scholarships, but you could also, you're changing the roster size.
Right.
For a lot of these sports. So it's possible that becomes grandfathered in, which is great for a program like a Nebraska, where they have a lot of walk-ons and they don't need to cut maybe 30 guys instantly. So that is something to keep an eye on. She also had some questions in general about, like, all these athletes that aren't in college right now that can't agree to this and then would have to live under these rules. Is there a different way, like legally, for each class to kind of approve this? And then also, some general questions about, like, well, you're going from a cap of $0 for schools to pay their athletes to $20.5 million. Is that immediately going to get a lawsuit for antitrust issues because now you're capping it at a different number? So all of that to say, it looks like the settlement is going to be approved. We don't know exactly the rules, but we are in a world, Joshua, where because people are expecting it to be approved, there's like this mad dash to do NIL deals.
It's sick.
It's crazy because there's the expectation, again, in the proposed settlement, is that there would be this clearinghouse that has to like approve NIL deals to make sure they're like real and like close to fair market value for anything that's over $600. So the idea is, well, okay, collectives that are paying exorbitant amount of money, maybe they're not going to be able to do that or to spend the exact dollar figures that they are. So they're all trying to spend all their money right now. We're seeing it with men's basketball guys in the portal, and we're seeing it in college football. because they don't think that these deals are going to have to go through the clearinghouse. It's crazy.
Yeah, I saw a basketball player got like the $3.5 million NIL deal. I'm like, oh man, I get, this is not to do with anything. I get frustrated because I feel like I missed out on so many dollars and time value of money because, you know, I'm the finance guy. I could be on a yacht somewhere in St. Bart's right now. That's neither here nor there. The clearinghouse to me is the thing that should have always existed when NIL came around. There always should have been a database where they could aggregate information. And the reason to me why it was important is because I was always anti pay for play. And so when you have transparency and you have this information, you can actually know what market value is. Like you can say, okay, a quarterback who's in the, you know, a top team in the Big Ten typically makes this much on an NIL deal. You can have that information. Then you can be like, no, they're just trying to funnel this kid money. We're not going to approve that deal. Should have always been a thing. So I'm glad to see it. I think this is also going to make collectives go in-house now, especially with like all the money that the athletic department is going to be paying out. But like they're going to want some control over the NIL stuff. And we're starting to see some of those changes happening right now in collectives that are shuttering or being phased out because of some of these changes here. I think it's a good thing because less people end up getting taken advantage of this way. I think less people are going to get lied to this way. Maybe there's a little bit less money for the guys at the top part of this, but they're going to find their money. Like if you're marketable and you're playing well, you're going to get paid. So, I mean, should have been here from the beginning, but I'm glad we're here now.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think direct payments from the school to the athletes is the way that it should have been all along. Everyone was just scared of things that look like employee employer instead of just saying like this actually is best for everyone involved to get rid of third parties. So that's where we're headed. We don't know the parameters yet. Don't know if people are going to be able to be phased in from a roster limit standpoint. I hope so. I don't think there's any reason this has to be immediate, that these new roster sizes need to be like as of July 1 or August 1. So that's something. And then, you know, we'll continue to follow because to your point about the top end guys, it's already this expectation that like people will figure out ways to skirt the cap. Like here's what you get for the school and here's what you get on the side. And again, we're not even in that world. It bothers me when people like already talk about trying to find loopholes and cheat the system when you're not even in the system yet.
It's the American way.
It is the American way. It is where we're headed. So again, that's kind of the macro of college sports right now. It's going to affect, you know, players, and it's going to affect the spring portal window for football because, again, we're seeing it in college basketball because we are before the implementation of the settlement. The settlement also hasn't even been approved officially, so people really think that you can do these deals right now before it's approved. So we'll see what that does for the spring portal market. And the payments that some of these guys are going to get. We'll have more from spring football trips to some of these Big Ten schools and various other storylines. And obviously, you know, the draft is around the corner. If you missed our previous shows on the Speed, you can watch them on Peacock. Joshua and I are both part of a draft preview show that has all the offensive guys, all the defensive guys with our pal Connor Rogers. You can go find that on Peacock. But we'll be back with more Rushing the Field next week, more spring football talk as we get closer and closer to some intriguing battles being decided and other storylines across college football. For Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach. Thanks for listening to Rush the Field, and we'll see you soon.